In 1931, a locksmith named Gerald Poole was hired to open a cedar chest found in the cellar of a condemned boarding house in Ashworth, Lancashire. Inside, he found a leather-bound diary. 47 entries, meticulously documented, each page written in a steady, deliberate hand. The diary belonged to a woman named Lillian Vane, who had vanished from that same boarding house 20 years earlier in the autumn of 1911. Poole later told a reporter from the Ashworth Gazette that he almost didn't notice the final entry. It was written on the inside of the back cover, in mirror script. When held to a looking glass, it read simply, "I can hear my bones remembering." But what unsettled Poole most was not the words. It was the fingerprints pressed into the margins of the last 7 pages. They were not in ink. They were not in blood. A forensic chemist at the University of Manchester later confirmed the residue was cerebrospinal fluid. This is the story of Lillian Vane, and the diary that should not exist. To understand what happened to Lillian, you must first understand the world she inhabited. Ashworth in 1911 was a mill town. The air smelled of coal smoke and lanolin from the wool factories that lined the River Colne. The streets were narrow. Gas lights still flickered in most homes. Medicine in that era was a strange marriage of emerging science and inherited superstition. Physicians still prescribed tinctures of mercury. Hysteria remained a formal diagnosis. The X-ray had only been in clinical use for 15 years, and many doctors viewed it with suspicion, believing prolonged exposure could curdle the humors of the blood. Photography, too, was a source of both wonder and anxiety. Spirit photography was a booming trade. Double exposures were sold as proof of the afterlife. The camera was not yet trusted as an objective instrument. It was seen, by many, as a machine that could lie. Or worse, a machine that could see what the eye refused to. Lillian Vane was 34 years old when she arrived at Mrs. Hargrove's boarding house on Sable Street in the spring of 1911. She was a former governess, unmarried. She had previously been employed by a family in Clitheroe, but had left that position under circumstances she never disclosed. Neighbors described her as quiet, particular. She kept her room immaculate. She labeled her tea tins with handwritten cards. She walked each evening along the canal path at precisely 7:15, regardless of weather. She attended St. Dunstan's Parish Church every Sunday, though the vicar, Father Ashcroft, noted that she never once took communion. She simply sat in the third pew, hands folded, watching. In her diary, her early entries are mundane. She writes about the food, the dampness of the walls, a persistent cough she attributes to the mill dust. There is nothing unusual about Lillian Vane. Not yet. The first anomaly appears in the diary on the 14th of June, 1911. Lillian writes that she woke at 3 in the morning to find her left hand was cold, not merely cool. Cold, she writes, as though it had been packed in river ice for hours. The rest of her body was warm. She held her left hand against a candle flame for several seconds. She felt nothing. By morning, the sensation had returned, but on her palm, she found a pattern of small, symmetrical blisters, arranged in a shape she describes as resembling a fern leaf. She visited Dr. Edmund Harrogate, a general practitioner on Clough Lane. Harrogate examined the blisters and noted in his own records, which survived in the Ashworth Medical Society archives, that the burns were inconsistent with any thermal source. They appeared, he wrote, to originate from beneath the skin, as though the tissue had been scalded from the inside out. He prescribed a zinc poultice and told her to rest, but he also made a secondary note in the margin of his ledger, one that was not meant for the patient. It read, "Subcutaneous thermal event. No credible external cause. Mark this case." Over the following weeks, the diary entries grow longer, more detailed, more frightened. On the 22nd of June, Lillian reports that she can hear a faint clicking sound inside her skull, not in her ears, behind them. She describes it as the sound of a telegraph machine operating in an adjacent room. On the 29th, she writes that her reflection in the wash basin mirror blinked 3 times, while her own eyes remained open. She meticulously documented the time. 4:17 in the morning. Dr. Harrogate examined her again on the 3rd of July. This time, he measured her pulse. Her right wrist registered 72 beats per minute. Her left wrist registered 41. He repeated the measurement 4 times. The discrepancy persisted. He called in a colleague, Dr. Neville Stroud, a visiting neurologist from the Royal Infirmary in Preston. Stroud performed a reflex examination and found that Lillian's left side responded a full 1.4 seconds before the stimulus was applied. Her body was reacting to the hammer before it struck. Stroud's sworn clinical testimony, filed with the Lancashire Medical Board, states, "The patient's left side nervous system appears to be operating in a temporal framework inconsistent with observed reality. I have no diagnosis. I have no precedent." On the 9th of July, Mrs. Hargrove, the landlady, reported hearing Lillian speaking in her room at night. 2 voices, both Lillian's. One speaking in English, the other in a language Mrs. Hargrove could not identify. She described it as English played backwards, but with different words. On the 15th of July, 1911, Dr. Stroud arranged for Lillian to be photographed at the Ashworth Cottage Hospital using a newly acquired radiographic apparatus. The intention was to examine her cranial structure for signs of lesion or tumor that might explain the neurological anomalies. 2 plates were exposed. The first showed a normal skull. Unremarkable bone density. No masses. The second plate, taken 90 seconds later from the same angle, showed a skull that contained no brain. The cranial cavity was empty, completely hollow. Except for what the radiologist, a technician named Arthur Jessup, described as a dense, coiled structure resembling a nautilus shell, positioned exactly where the pineal gland should have been. During the exposure of the second plate, every glass instrument in the examination room cracked simultaneously. Jessup suffered a nosebleed that would not stop for 3 hours. And Lillian Vane sat perfectly still on the examination chair, smiling. Her diary entry for that evening contains only 1 line. It knows it has been seen. Lillian Vane was last seen on the 17th of July, 1911. She left Mrs. Hargrove's boarding house at 7:15 in the evening for her usual walk along the canal. She did not return. A search was conducted for 11 days. The canal was dredged. Nothing was found. Dr. Harrogate's clinical notes on the case were sealed by the Lancashire Medical Board and marked not for general circulation. The second radiographic plate disappeared from the hospital's records sometime before 1914. Arthur Jessup, the radiologist, resigned from his position 3 weeks after the photograph was taken. He never worked in medicine again. He became a beekeeper in Westmoreland and reportedly refused to be photographed for the rest of his life. Mrs. Hargrove's boarding house was condemned in 1929. It was during demolition preparations that the cedar chest was found, and the diary was finally opened. In 2017, Dr. Fiona Lacey of the Wellcome Institute for Neurological History published a paper titled Temporal Dissociation and Somatic Autonomy, Revisiting the Vane Anomaly. In it, she proposed that Lillian's symptoms bore a striking resemblance to theoretical models of quantum decoherence occurring at the biological level. The idea that a living nervous system could, under unknown conditions, begin to experience time non-linearly. The reflexes that preceded their stimulus, the dual pulse rates, the predictive tissue burns. Lacey suggested these were not symptoms of illness. They were symptoms of displacement. The diary of Lillian Vane is currently held in a private collection. Its pages have yellowed. The cerebrospinal fingerprints have darkened to amber. But the mirror script message on the back cover remains perfectly legible. I can hear my bones remembering. What if disappearance is not an ending? What if it is simply the body catching up to where the mind has already gone? If this story unsettled you, subscribe to Forgotten Dread Tales. Leave a comment telling us what you think the second radiographic plate truly showed. And remember, some diaries are locked for a reason. Some should never have been opened.